My nephew's accidental text message revealed a shocking truth about my family's scheme to rob me of my inheritance. Until that moment, I had always thought my family was just a bit unfair, nothing too extreme, just the typical favoritism shown toward my older sister, Rachel, who is 40. She and her husband, Leo, 39, have always been the picture-perfect couple, complete with two wonderful kids, Ethan, 17, and Julia, 15. They live in a spacious house, enjoy lavish vacations, and receive unwavering support from our parents. In contrast, I chose a different path. I run a modest business, I'm single, and I don't have children. My life is stable, comfortable, and devoid of drama, at least, it was until recently. I never felt the need to compete with Rachel, nor did I mind being seen as the less accomplished sibling. However, I soon discovered that it was never just about favoritism, my family was actively undermining me. The only reason I stumbled upon this revelation was due to a text message from my nephew. It all began on an ordinary Tuesday. I was at home, engrossed in a TV show, when my phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. "Uncle Dave hasn't figured it out yet, has he? I don't think he suspects anything." I stared at my phone, bewildered, and before I could respond, the message vanished. Moments later, another text appeared. "Sorry, wrong person. Ignore that." I'm not one to overanalyze situations, but something about that exchange felt off. Ethan and I have always had a good relationship. He's a bright kid, more perceptive than his parents give him credit for. But this didn't seem like a simple mistake. I pressed him for clarification, and he quickly replied, "Nothing, just a mix-up. Ignore me." I decided to let it slide for the time being, but the nagging feeling of unease lingered. A week later, we gathered for our usual Sunday dinner at my parents' house. As I entered, I greeted everyone and took my seat at the dining table. It was then that I noticed something peculiar. Every time I spoke, my parents, Rachel, and Leo exchanged furtive glances. These weren't the usual looks, they were quick, anxious glances, as if they were bracing for me to bring something up. I hadn't mentioned Ethan's strange text to anyone, but their reactions made it clear there was something they were desperate to keep from me. During dinner, Leo excused himself to take a phone call, stepping into the next room. I could still hear him whispering, "We just need a little more time before he finds out." That was the moment I realized I wasn't imagining things. I chose not to say anything right away, but I began to observe my family more closely. Later that evening, my cousin Meredith pulled me aside and said, "Man, if you knew what your parents have been up to, you'd flip." I pressed her for details, but she just laughed it off and changed the subject. Then there was Julia, my niece, who casually mentioned something about that house while talking to my parents. I asked her what house, and the entire room fell silent. Leo quickly interjected, laughing nervously, "Oh, just an old family thing. Nothing important." That's when it hit me. My grandparents had left behind a house years ago, intended to belong to both Rachel and me after they passed. I hadn't heard anything about it since, and I had assumed my parents were managing it. But now, I wasn't so sure. That night, I went home and started digging through old paperwork. I don't usually sift through files, but something compelled me to check. I stumbled upon a bank statement I didn't recognize, which listed my name alongside Rachel's on an account I had no knowledge of. The transactions were baffling: large withdrawals, money being shuffled around, and most suspiciously, an old deposit labeled property sale. I had no recollection of selling any property. The next morning, I called my mom and casually asked if she knew anything about an account with my name on it. Her tone shifted immediately. "It's not something you need to worry about," she said, trying to brush it off, but I could hear the tension in her voice. That was all the confirmation I needed. A friend of mine works in real estate, so I asked him to check the property records for my grandparents' old house. It had been sold without my knowledge. I had never signed anything or agreed to sell, yet somehow, my name was on the paperwork. A real estate contact later informed me that a third-party notary had confirmed my signature. Someone had impersonated me, forged my name. I confronted Rachel first. I showed her the documents and asked when we had agreed to sell the house. She barely attempted to tear this family apart over theft, not just money. That's when Julia, completely unaware of the damage already done, blurted out, "I thought we were waiting until next year to tell him." The entire room froze. Leo shot her a look so sharp that she instantly clammed up, turning pale as she realized what she had just said. I leaned back in my chair, incredulous. So, you were planning on telling me when? After you spent all the money? My father, who had been silent until that moment, finally sighed and set down his fork. He didn't look at me when he spoke. We sold the house. No denial, no excuses, just a matter-of-fact statement, as if it were just another piece of family business. We did what needed to be done, he continued. Rachel has kids to take care of, you don't. That was their justification, because Rachel had children, she was entitled to my share of the inheritance. I looked at them, all of them. My mother, acting as if I were the one making a scene, my father, who had already accepted that he had done something unforgivable, Rachel, who still looked too smug for someone caught red-handed, and Leo, who was trying to hold everything together with a facade of sympathy. I called them thieves. My mother gasped, as if I had just cursed in church. Leo reached for Rachel's arm, whispering something under his breath, but Rachel just leaned back in her chair and smirked. What are you going to do about it? She actually said, as if she knew they had me backed into a corner, as if she knew they thought I wouldn't dare escalate this. That's when I told them I was hiring a lawyer. My mother clutched her chest as if I had physically hurt her. You're going to ruin this family. Dad's face turned red, he slammed his hand on the table, standing up in fury. You think some lawyer is going to fix this? You think tearing this family apart over some house is worth it? Leo turned on Rachel, snapping at her under his breath, probably realizing just how badly she had mishandled the situation. Ethan got up so fast that his chair scraped against the floor as he ran upstairs in tears. Julia just sat there, her eyes darting between all of us, clearly trying to process how quickly this family dinner had turned into a war zone. Rachel didn't say anything for a few seconds, just staring at me. Then finally, her smirk faded. She got up, tossed her napkin onto her plate, and walked out of the dining room as if she were the one who had been wronged. Leo followed her a second later, still whispering angrily at her. My mother wiped at her eyes, muttering something about how she couldn't believe I would do this. I stood up, grabbed my documents, and looked directly at them. No, you ruined this family the second you decided I didn't matter. Then I walked out. By the time I got home, my phone was already blowing up, text after text, some from extended family, some from family friends, and some from relatives I hadn't spoken to in months. Some called me selfish, saying I should just let it go, others told me they had suspected something shady was going on for years. A few sided with me, especially after I sent screenshots of the documents, but most just didn't want to get involved. Then there were the messages from my parents. Mom, I can't believe you would do this to us. Dad, fix this now before it's too late. Rachel, you're making a mistake. Leo, we can talk about this like adults. I ignored every single one. They had spent years ensuring I never knew the truth, now they were panicking because I did, and they still had no idea how far I was willing to go to make things right. Rachel thought this was over, she thought I was bluffing. She was wrong. The next morning, I sat in a lawyer's office with a folder full of documents. My real estate contact had helped me pull up the property records, the forged sale agreement, and the bank statements linked to my name. My lawyer flipped through everything, barely speaking until he reached the signature page. He tapped the forged signature and immediately pointed it out. This is fraud. That was all I needed to hear. He walked me through my options, explaining that not only was this a civil case, but it could also have criminal implications. There was no gray area, my name had been used illegally, and money that rightfully belonged to me had been stolen. I wasted no time. I told him I wanted to move forward, and he started drafting the paperwork immediately. With the legal wheels turning, I sent a single text to Rachel. Less than 5 minutes later, the Wallen decided to change his strategy. He called me, trying to sound calm and reasonable. We should talk this out like adults, he suggested, proposing a family meeting, no lawyers, no drama, just a mature conversation. I ignored the call. Then my mom texted, we're still family. Do you really want to drag us through court? Rachel, on the other hand, wasn't trying to be reasonable at all. She called me, furious. You have no idea what you're messing with. Back off before you regret it. I hung up without a word. The next morning, I officially filed the lawsuit. The reaction was immediate. Relatives who had stayed neutral now had to pick a side. Some doubled down, insisting that this should have been handled privately, while others cut contact with Rachel and my parents, disgusted by what they had done. For the first time, Rachel was starting to realize she wasn't in control anymore, and now she was panicking. The lawsuit became public knowledge faster than I expected. Word spread through the family like wildfire. At first, it was just whispers in the group chats, messages asking if it was true, if I was really suing my own family. Then it escalated. Relatives started taking sides. Some called me, saying they understood why I was doing this. Others accused me of betraying the family, acting like I was some kind of outsider instead of the person who had been robbed. The family chat exploded. One message stood out: blood is thicker than money. I can't believe you're doing this. My mother played the victim perfectly. She sent long, dramatic messages about how she was just an old woman trying to keep the family together and how I was tearing everything apart over money. How could my own son do this to me? That line popped up in at least 3 different chats, but fewer people were buying it. The moment I sent screenshots of the forged documents, some of those same relatives started backtracking. Then Leo switched tactics. He sent me an email: "We made mistakes. Let's settle this privately." Translation: they were scared. I forwarded it straight to my lawyer. Then came the next bombshell. My lawyer called after doing a deeper financial investigation. He had found another account with both Rachel and my father's names on it. This one had thousands of dollars in it, money that had been siphoned out of my inheritance right after I got that call. Ethan texted me again: "I just heard Dad say if Dave finds out about the other account, we're done." They were still hiding things. Then my real estate contact got back to me. Rachel and Leo hadn't just stolen the house and flipped it for a profit, they had used part of the money to put a down payment on their vacation home. I sent everything to my lawyer. His response? "This isn't just fraud, it's criminal." Rachel's confidence cracked over the following weeks. First, she was suspended from work. Then Leo stopped defending her. By the time she called me, I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. For the first time, there was no smugness, no arrogance. She begged me to drop the case. "We can fix this. You don't have to do this." I said nothing, letting her talk herself in circles, waiting for her to say something incriminating. She did. It was just a business decision. We thought it was the best thing for the family. I asked her one question: "Why didn't you think I was part of that family?" Dead silence. Then she hung up. Shortly after, my dad tried his own version of damage control. He finally spoke up, acting like this was all just a misunderstanding. "We just did what was best for the family." I asked him the same question: "Why didn't that family include me?" He had no answer. Then my uncle reached out. "You should know this isn't the first time they've helped Rachel pull something shady." He had receipts. It turned out my parents had covered for Rachel before. She had been in financial trouble multiple times, and every time, my parents had quietly bailed her out using family money, using my grandparents' money. More cousins started cutting ties. Some still defended Rachel, saying it was just money, but others had seen enough. Then Ethan sent me another text: "I can't stand being in this house anymore." He had been the only person in that house who had done the right thing, and now he was paying for it. Then came the final hit: someone leaked details of the lawsuit to Rachel's workplace. Rachel worked in finance, her entire job relied on trust and credibility. Suddenly, her name was circulating in the wrong circles, and clients were asking questions. Leo lost it. He called me, screaming, "You're ruining our lives." I didn't say anything, I just hung up. My response? Good, who held the family together. But now, that facade crumbled. The whispers turned into shouts, and the family members who once supported her began to distance themselves. They had seen the truth laid bare in court, and they were no longer willing to stand by someone who had betrayed their own child. My mother had played the victim for so long that she had forgotten the consequences of her actions. As Rachel's life spiraled out of control, my parents found themselves facing the fallout of their choices. The financial collapse was swift and brutal. They went from being financially secure to drowning in debt almost overnight. The legal fees piled up, and the court-ordered damages drained their retirement savings. They had thought they could manipulate the situation, but now they were the ones being manipulated by the consequences of their greed. Ethan's testimony was the final nail in the coffin. He took the stand and without hesitation revealed that he had overheard my parents and Rachel laughing about how I would never find out about their scheme. His words echoed in the courtroom, and the impact was devastating. The credibility of my parents was shattered, and they could no longer hide behind their lies. Leo, who had initially tried to maintain a semblance of support for Rachel, quickly distanced himself from her as the truth came to light. He filed for separation the very next day, publicly blaming Rachel for dragging their family into this mess. He wasted no time moving on, dating someone new within weeks of filing. It was as if he had been waiting for the opportunity to escape, and now that it had presented itself, he seized it without a second thought. Rachel, once the golden child, found herself completely alone. Her job fired her permanently, and her employer had been waiting for the court's decision to take action. After seeing the evidence, they blacklisted her from the industry. The financial collapse was swift. The mounting legal fees and court-ordered damages left her with no choice but to sell her house, the same house she had bought using money from my stolen inheritance. The sale didn't even cover all her debts, and with nowhere else to go, she crawled back to my parents, who were now in no position to help her. My mother, who had always prided herself on being the perfect family matriarch, was now facing the harsh reality of her actions. The judge had looked directly at her and my father, delivering the harshest words yet: "You stole from your own child. You should be ashamed." Those words echoed in my mind as I watched the fallout unfold. The verdict came down in my favor. I received my rightful inheritance, plus additional damages. Winning the court case didn't mean everything was over. If anything, the real fallout was just beginning. Rachel was the first to hit rock bottom. With no job and mounting legal fees, she had no choice but to sell her house. The sale didn't even cover all her debts, and with nowhere else to go, she crawled back to my parents, who were now in no position to help her. Leo wasted no time finalizing the divorce, taking full custody of the kids, and making sure everyone knew he wanted nothing to do with Rachel. He even posted on Facebook about leaving a loser behind, making sure everyone knew he had moved on. Rachel had lost everything: her marriage, her kids, her home. As for my mother, her entire reputation collapsed. For years, she had built an image of herself as the perfect family matriarch, the caring mother, the wise elder, the one who held the family together. But now, that facade crumbled. The whispers turned into shouts, and the family members who once supported her began to distance themselves. They had seen the truth laid bare in court, and they were no longer willing to stand by someone who had betrayed their own child. The fallout from the trial was relentless. My parents, once the pillars of our family, were now the subjects of gossip and disdain. They had thought they could manipulate the situation, but now they were the ones being manipulated by the consequences of their greed. The family gatherings that had once been filled with laughter and warmth became tense and awkward, with relatives avoiding eye contact and conversations turning cold. I had never wanted this. I had never wanted to tear my family apart, but they had left me no choice. I had fought for what was rightfully mine, and in doing so, I had exposed the truth. The truth that had been hidden for so long was finally out in the open, and there was no going back. As I reflected on everything that had transpired, I felt a mix of emotions. I had won my case, but at what cost? My family was shattered, and the people I had once loved were now strangers. I had gained my inheritance, but I had lost my family in the process. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure: I would never allow anyone to take advantage of me again. Who held the family together now? Nobody believed that anymore. Word had spread through the extended family, and no one wanted anything to do with her. At family gatherings, people avoided her, old friends stopped calling. Even the relatives who had initially taken her side went silent when they realized she had been lying to them for years. Then my dad's health started declining. The stress of the lawsuit, the loss of money, and the embarrassment were too much for him to handle. He had always been the one who acted like he was in control, but now he had nothing left to control. The family drama kept escalating. Group chats exploded with activity. Some relatives cut off my parents completely, refusing to even speak to them, while others demanded answers. Then came the money issue. A few uncles started digging through old records and realized that my parents had been deceiving them for years, borrowing money, promising to pay it back, and then conveniently forgetting. Now that my parents were broke, the uncles wanted their money back, but my parents had nothing left to give. That's when my mom finally reached out to me. She was crying, sobbing, begging for financial help. I ignored her completely. Then she got desperate. She called my employer, trying to sabotage me. She told them I was unstable, that I was making a mistake, that I needed to be taught a lesson. My boss laughed her off, dismissing her claims as absurd. Then my dad made one last attempt. He sent me a handwritten letter saying, "Family should forgive." I threw it away without a second thought. Then a cousin reached out with one last piece of news: Rachel was now being investigated for other fraudulent activities. Apparently, she had done similar things before, but now people were finally paying attention. At that point, I was done. I cut all contact, changed my number, and for the first time in my life, I felt true peace. A year later, everything had completely unraveled for Rachel and my parents. Rachel officially declared bankruptcy, with no house, no job, and no reputation left. She was left with nothing. The court cases, legal fees, and debts had wiped her out completely. Leo, on the other hand, moved on fast. He finalized the divorce, remarried, and moved out of state with his kids. He made sure everyone knew he had nothing to do with Rachel anymore. He even posted a picture on Facebook with his new wife, captioned, "Sometimes you have to leave the past behind." Rachel wasn't even a footnote in his life anymore. As for my parents, they lost their home. With their savings drained from legal fees and no financial help from anyone, they couldn't afford their mortgage anymore. They were forced to move into a tiny apartment far from the family they used to control. The worst part for them? No one cared. The extended family had cut them off completely. They had spent years acting like the head of the family, manipulating people and playing favorites, and now nobody wanted anything to do with them. Then my mom tried one last stunt. She started posting on social media, talking about how family should stick together, how she had been betrayed by her own child, and how she only ever wanted what was best for everyone. Nobody bought it. The comments were brutal. Some relatives called her out directly, saying she was only a victim of her own actions, while others just ignored her completely. Finally, my dad gave up. After a year of failed attempts to reach out, he just stopped trying. No more letters, no more messages, nothing. And Ethan? He was thriving. He cut off all contact with his parents, moved into his college dorm, and was doing better than ever. Then came Rachel's final humiliation. She got caught in another scam. Even after everything that had happened, she still tried to pull another shady deal. This time, she wasn't so lucky. There was enough evidence to charge her, and now she was facing potential jail time. As for me, I used my rightful inheritance to buy my dream home. For the first time, I was completely free of my family's mess. Then my mom made one last attempt at contact. She sent a letter that simply said, "We still love you." I didn't bother responding. Then Rachel had the audacity to call me. She actually begged me for money. I laughed and hung up. My dad tried one last time, wanting to meet up and talk. I blocked his number. A cousin later confirmed it. My parents were completely broke, and they were still blaming me. The truth? I had zero regrets. They did this to themselves. I had fought for what was rightfully mine, and in the end, I had emerged stronger and more resilient than ever. I had built a life for myself, free from the toxic ties that had once bound me. I had learned that family isn't just about blood.